everybody. Welcome to yet another amazing episode of Ichabod's House. We are on Season 2, Episode 5, people, and we are super proud of that and pumped and stoked and all of that. This is part 2 of our Ghosts and Hauntings series, and I am your host, Andy, along with my sister, Jen.
Hi, everybody. Jen here.
Do we have any Google and Beyond? I thought that we did, but maybe we don't.
I'm sure we did, but I can't remember it. So
that's fine. We're just going to move on then to Ichabod's Nose. And I have a good old crusty yet wet one that is loved by everyone. I watched, TikTok, is all the rage, obviously. And my 9-year-old was watching some TikToks, and they had the sound on there from Beetlejuice. Somebody did a clip from Beetlejuice, and he's like, "This is so funny, Mom. I got to tell you all about it." And I'm thinking, so I had to break his heart and say, "Yeah, honey, I know that movie's really, really old, and I've watched it." What? He was like, so anyway, so we watched Beetlejuice, and that is still a joy, and Michael Keaton is still awesome.
Very cool. He is. That was a very good movie.
Yes.
I have a couple. First, this one's an oldie. This is my Tom Selleck keychain / beer bottle opener.
Does it, when it gets cold or wet, do the swim shorts disappear and expose Tom Selleck?
They don't, but you can use your finger to be creative in this area right here if you wanted to put something, through there.
See, with my camera, it looked like those were the swim trunks. Got it.
No, that's the opening for the bottle opener. So
that's what
this works well. My son and his girlfriend gave me that. The other one I want to give is something called Granny O'Grim. Thank you.
Granny O'Grim.
So Granny O'Grim.
I think it needs to be said with an Irish accent.
Yes, Granny O'Grim. Granny O'Grim. She is a grandma who tells a horrifying story to her granddaughter in bed. It's a Pixar-style animated short. I wanted to give I'll put a link to it on the show notes. Anyway, it's friggin' hilarious. Watch that. It's her telling the story of her version of Sleeping Beauty to this child as a bedtime story and ends up terrifying the child. The other one pick I have is called Pieces of Her, starring Toni Collette on Netflix, and that's really good. Very well done.
I've seen the trailer for that one, and I want to watch that for sure.
Yes.
Love me some Toni Collette.
So, are we ready?
Yeah, we are absolutely ready.
Let's get into this. We are still exploring different hauntings across America, and this week we continue with the Northeast. Yale, to be exact. Did you know that Yale University is over 300 years old? That's right. It opened its doors to higher learning in the year 1701. Having this much history means there are lots of stories of students still wandering the libraries trying to get that A, professors smoking a pipe as they walk across campus, and early colonists churning butter in some remote corner of the campus. All have passed on, of course.
And I would love to hear all of those stories. Today, however, we are going to tell you about an area of Yale that has everyone talking. Woolsey Hall was built in 1901 in recognition of the university's 200th anniversary. It is the main auditorium on campus. It has hosted several symphonies and rock concerts and can seat 2,500 people. But the focal point of Woolsey Hall is the Newberry Memorial Organ, one of the largest and most renowned organs in the world.
A memorial organ. Who knew there could be such a thing as
It's a big freaking deal, organ. Jen.
A man named Harry B. Jepson was the first organist for the school, and he was in charge of playing and maintaining it. Harry started playing the organ around 1902. By the 1940s, Yale forced Harry to retire, and he never played the Newberry organ again. It is thought that he made peace with what happened while he was still alive. However, his spirit seemed to get annoyed with rock concerts. "You kids and your rock and roll music. It's the devil's music.
Devil's music, loud music. Get it out of here. Turn it down." Apparently, when Jimi Hendrix played there in 1968, that was it. That was a straw that broke the camel's back. He was done. Jepson's ghost had it. he became angry. And since that time, people have reported a sense of evil in the hall, especially near the organ chambers and in the basement. People have heard the organ playing when the hall is empty and locked. I was always afraid of the organ or the piano playing on its own when we would have those lock-ins at church. I don't know if you ever attended those, but I was always super afraid of that happening. It never did.
Ah, the 80s. That was the decade of the lock-ins. Do they still have lock-ins? Do you know?
I think they did up until COVID. I don't know if they were as rampant. I can't answer that.
I went to so many lock-ins.
I did too.
So did you, for Girl Scouts and
School and church.
you know,
and,
I can think of, and we'd go on a Saturday night and come back home and have to go to church all hungover and smelling like chlorine from the YMCA pool, and oh my God.
You went to church hungover? You're a sinner.
It was hungover from the lock-in, like, you know, the lack of sleep hangover.
Wow, you were wild.
I didn't go to church hungover until high school.
Fantastic.
So let's go now to Philadelphia and Eastern State Penitentiary. This prison was the location of an experiment in law enforcement. The mindset driving this prison is the thought that by giving a prisoner time to reflect on his wrongdoing, he would eventually reform himself by turning to God to make penance, hence the word penitentiary.
Did you know that?
Yeah, the penitentiaries housed the penitents, people who had to atone for their sins initially.
Well, I didn't know that, Jen. It was news to me. Okay, so the new facility opened in October 1829, and it was one of the largest public buildings of its kind in the United States. Hauntings are all about being large. The large organ, the largest penitentiary. Go big or go home.
Mm-hmm.
According to SmithsonianMag.com, the facility and the search for reform came about because of the concerned citizens of Philadelphia, Jen. The city was growing, and so was crime.
Men, women, thieves, rapists, and murderers were all housed together in unclean conditions. There were inadequate conditions to survive the cold in the winter, and some prisoners died of starvation. Rape and other attacks were daily occurrences, and the guards did nothing about it. In fact, the guards made money by selling the prisoners booze. Oh, God.
They said up to 20 gallons a day they'd sell to the prisoners. How the prisoners got money or what they used as currency, I'm not really sure on. We can imagine, but don't want to.
Right?
Yeah. So the Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of the Public Prisons came to the rescue. That's a name. Let me say that again. The Philadelphia Society for Alleviating the Miseries of Public Prisons came to the rescue. I mean, it's a name you have to hear twice because you can't get it. You can't remember it all if you just hear it once. Reform rather than punishment.
PSAMP.
Okay, so PSAMP came to the rescue. Reform rather than punishment was the order of the day. These citizens were going to save these lost souls from their own demise. Each prisoner lived in complete isolation, with a Bible their only possession. They had chores like basket weaving or shoemaking to occupy their time. They never left their cells. They only spoke to the guards. Well, I shouldn't say that. They were allowed to leave their cells a little bit during the day. And they only spoke to the guards through a small hole.
You know, if you gave me a TV and a bunch of books and a vat of yarn and a crochet hook, I'd be content to remain in my cell 24/7. And
yeah, me too.
You know,
for sure. If I had books and
it sounds like
things to write with, and I would agree, crochet, get my ukulele. I need to learn how to play that. I'd be totally fine in an 8x8 cell with nobody. Mom. That wouldn't be a thing. I'd be okay.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
I might actually thrive.
You might. Maybe these bags under my eyes would disappear. Damn. The school of thought was that isolation would lead the inmate to their own reformation and eventual release. If they thought long and hard about what they had done, why they had done it, and became besties with God himself, they would be on a new path, a path to righteousness. They were allowed to go outside alone for a little bit of each day, and they did get a visit from the warden. He visited every prisoner every day.
Because that's godlike. That's what you do.
It's godlike. That's what you do.
When an inmate was admitted to the prison or when they moved to and from their cells, they had to do so in a hood. This was for two reasons. One, they didn't want them learning the layout of the prison so they could plan an escape. And two, if they were hooded, no one would recognize them once they were out of prison. Prisoners were required to be silent unless they were asked a direct question from one of the guards or the warden. Failure to follow this rule led to strict punishment.
How strict, you ask? I'm guessing like spankings.
Oh,
The warden
I think
spank them.
after you read this, you'll probably wish it was spankings.
All right. Well, if an inmate made even the slightest noise, they could be placed in a straitjacket. If the noise was loud enough, there was a mad chair, which had so many restraints on it, it made even the slightest movement impossible. If an inmate was caught talking, he might be forced to wear the Iron Gag. This was a piece of metal that was clamped to his tongue. Ooh, but that's not all. The clamp was attached to leather gloves that he was forced to wear. The smallest movement could cause excruciating pain. Oh, so not spanking.
Not spanking. They'd probably say, please, spank me. But that would have gotten them the Iron Gag, though, if they said that. And as you could imagine, there are many stories of prisoners accidentally severing their own tongues, and at least one died while wearing it. Another popular torture method was the water bath. Is that redundant? It feels redundant. Anyway, inmates were tied to the walls and doused with water. In the middle of the night, in the freezing winter months, it didn't matter. It didn't matter when it was. The water would then freeze on the inmates' bodies. I'm wondering if you had to fart really loud to get this kind of torture. I mean, how loud do you have to be? What are the levels, you know?
What if you've got like a respiratory infection? What do you, if you sneeze or you cough or whatever, does that count as?
I don't know.
Man.
I don't know.
And yeah, crazy. And then there was the Klondike. Some prisons have what is called the hole. This is solitary confinement, but the prisoners of this penitentiary were already solitarily confined. So what to do? Well, you dig a series of underground cells with no skylights, no disco balls, no fresh air, and no plumbing. Inmates were forced to live down there for several weeks at a time. Not sure what actions forced this punishment, but I think I'd rather have this than the Iron Gag. So you'd have to kind of just find a corner to poop in and pee in and, you know.
Yeah, but I'd still rather do that for a
That's
few
gross.
weeks than have the Iron Gag. I think that'd be bad.
It would be.
I'd rather sit in a hole
would.
for a while.
I agree. Yeah.
In 1842, Charles Dickens, of all people, visited the penitentiary and called it, quote, hopeless, cruel, and wrong. It only took 142 years of them trying to, quote unquote, fix the prison system to realize they had failed miserably. The prison closed in 1971. In the mid-1990s, it reopened for tours. Considering the torturous past of the prison, it is no surprise that there are some really pissed-off ghosts living there.
As early as the 1940s, inmates themselves reported paranormal activity. Maybe this is what earned them the Iron Gag or the Klondike as punishment. In the 1990s, a man named Gary Johnson was working on a lock during the restoration of the prison. After he got the door open, he saw shadowy shapes moving all around him. It was like the ghosts were finally free.
Which is interesting because if you're a ghost, I thought you could move through stuff, but maybe they symbolically felt imprisoned and had to see the door open before they would move through it. I don't know. These are just questions that come to mind. Cell block 12 is where you need to visit, though. People have reported hearing voices and sometimes even laughter down the hallways. Shadow figures are also seen often here. There is a resident up in the guard's tower as well. A shadowy figure has been seen walking up there, calmly looking down from time to time, checking things out in the yard.
Paranormal shows have done investigations, but perhaps the most memorable one was done with the guys from Ghost Hunters. Brian and Dave entered cell block 4 around 3 a.m. As Hobbs snapped a photograph, they both thought they saw a huge black shape rise up and move in front of them. Brian yelled a now famous line, "Dude, run!" I remember that. I saw that episode.
Did you? So yeah, much to the dismay of the production crew, they quickly debunked the figure as a shadow made from the camera flash. However, the video camera that was rolling during the same time did catch a shadowy figure quickly moving through the cell block. Try as they might, they were unable to debunk this shape. If you want to have a ghostly experience, you should definitely tour the Eastern State Penitentiary.
Damn. While the prison in Philadelphia is noticeably haunted, it probably isn't as haunted as Gettysburg, Pennsylvania, home of the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. An estimated 50,000 troops fell victim to the fighting here by death, wounds, or going missing. There have been many ghost stories over the years that have come out of Gettysburg, but did you know that the first one took place even before the battle was over?
That's right. Crazy. The 20th Maine Infantry were almost to Gettysburg, but became lost in the dark. They came upon a fork in the road and were greeted by a man wearing a three-cornered hat sitting on a horse. It is said that both the man and his horse glowed and that the man bore a striking resemblance to George Washington. He motioned for the regiment to follow him. Believing he was a Union soldier, they did. Once he got them on the right path to their destination, he disappeared.
Ah, damn, that's cool.
Isn't that neat?
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Go George. On July 3rd, the final day of the battle, Confederate General Robert E. Lee felt the battle was slipping away. Desperate, he ordered 12,000 troops to attack the Union forces who were standing firm on Cemetery Ridge. The soldiers marched slowly and methodically to their own doom, 6,000 of them dying by the Union soldiers' hands. Today, if you stand on top of Cemetery Ridge, it is said that you can see row after row of soldiers walking to their deaths. Ooh, shivers.
I know, it shivers me too. While the battle at Cemetery Ridge was going strong, a 20-year-old named Jenny Wade was at her sister's house baking bread for the Union soldiers. A stray bullet flew through the house, striking Jenny and killing her instantly. She's the only civilian known to die during the Battle of Gettysburg. Visitors to the historical site known as the Jenny Wade House often report smelling freshly baked bread. Her spirit is most felt in the basement where her body was kept until relatives arrived to bury her.
Wow, that super sucks.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps the most terrifying of all haunting experiences in Gettysburg is that of Pennsylvania Hall at Gettysburg College. The hall was taken over by Confederate soldiers, and the basement was turned into a makeshift hospital. In the early 1980s, two men who were working on an upper floor got in the elevator and pushed the button for the first floor, but the elevator passed the first floor and went to the basement. The basement was replaced by bloody, screaming Confederate soldiers with doctors standing over them trying to save their lives.
Yeah, and they were able, they pushed the button to go back up to the first floor a few times before the doors actually closed and took them back up. And then other people had gone down there. It hasn't happened since, so they don't know why it happened that one time, but these guys were freaked out by that. Now we're going to go to the Hussak Tunnel. Once constructed, it would provide a direct railroad route between, try to say that 5 times fast, railroad route between Greenfield and Williamstown. Hussak Mountain was sitting in the way of progress. The project started in 1851 and finished in 1873. It had taken nearly 25 years and $21 million to complete. On October 17, 1867, several workers were in the central shaft. A workman was lighting a lamp and accidentally ignited a gasoline tank.
Oh my God. 13 men were working in the shaft that day. The inferno from the gas tank left the rescuers believing that there was no hope that there were any survivors. A year later, it was found that the men actually did survive, but they died slowly from asphyxiation due to the poisonous gases. The lucky 13 are still around, however, making noises and muffled wails. Shadowy figures and apparitions with picks and shovels are seen, and when one calls out to them, they disappear.
Can you imagine?
Ugh.
Apparently the shaft got a little bit flooded, and so they made like a makeshift raft, and they survived for a little while. I mean, like probably a few days before the gases, but nobody thought that they were alive. So it's pretty sad. Okay, so now on to something that we all know and love for some morbid reason. We do. We all love this story. We, as Americans, it is our right to love this morbid story, and we do. We can't get enough of it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so we are going to discuss the infamous Lizzie Borden B&B, another place on our bucket list for sure. We all know the chant. Lizzie Borden took an axe and gave her mother 40 whacks, and when she saw what she had done, she gave her father 41. While this is catchy and great for jump roping, it isn't that accurate. The murder weapon was a hatchet, not an axe. Her mother suffered around 20 whacks, while her father received 11. Now that we have that cleared up, let's talk about what really happened.
Okay, what's the difference between a hatchet and an axe?
I think a hatchet has a much bigger head. And I could have said that in a really dirty way, but I did not.
Okay. The murders took place in 1892. Lizzie was 32 years old and still living at home, which is enough to drive anybody crazy. Parents, kids, whatever.
For sure.
Get out. On August 4th, the family's maid, Bridget Sullivan, was upstairs in her room when she heard Lizzie screaming. "Come down quick! Father's dead! Someone's come in and killed him!" Andrew Borden was lying dead on the couch. He was lying there in such a way that it looked like he was just sleeping. However, the pools of blood surrounding him told a different story.
Neighbors were fanning and applying cold compresses to the shocked Lizzie and asked her where she had been when all of this happened.
"I needed something from the barn. Doesn't everyone go outside to the barn in the middle of the day? Especially privileged and entitled young women. We are always in and out of the barn, oblivious to the happenings around us. Ich bin ein Berliner."
I feel like you're a little possessed right now.
I was trying to channel John Kennedy because he had that accent.
I thought you did
I was
well.
in the barn.
I thought
I
you
needed
did well.
something from the barn.
Yeah.
Doesn't everyone go outside? Let me do it again. I was in the barn. I needed something from the barn. Doesn't everyone go outside to the barn in the middle of the day, especially privileged and entitled young women? We are always in and out of the barn, oblivious to the happenings around us.
Yeah, that was good. The police found the body of Abby Borden in a guest room. She was even more of a bloody mess than her husband. Lizzie was the only person ever arrested for the murders. It is said that she and her father had a lot of tension between them. For instance, Andrew recently divided his property among his relatives rather than between his two daughters. Lizzie also had pet pigeons. Andrew thought they were becoming a nuisance, so he decapitated them and left the bodies for Lizzie to find.
Also, Andrew reportedly thought that he was being poisoned shortly before the murders. Since he was the town curmudgeon, there were many possible suspects. However, it is unlikely that he was poisoned because he was unpopular. There is also the fact that Lizzie was seen buying cyanide at the local pharmacy just days before the murder. Lizzie's alibi was under great scrutiny as well. The murders took place, and it looked like the bodies had been moved or readjusted in some way, and Lizzie was in the barn the whole time. What was it she went to get?
Yeah, seriously, come on. Lizzie was rightfully put on trial. However, the evidence against her was pretty slim. No bloodstains on her and no bloody clothes were ever found. A broken hatchet was found in the basement, but it couldn't be connected to the murders. With no real evidence, the jury deliberated for 90 minutes before acquitting her. After the trial, Lizzie changed her name to Lizbeth and lived a lavish lifestyle in her new home until her death in 1927.
There are many theories of who the actual killer was. Some think it was Lizzie. Others say it wasn't her, but that she knew who it was. And there are those who believe that Lizzie had nothing to do with it. I mean, was Bridget Sullivan, the maid, even questioned? Whoever the murderer was will probably never be known. Andrew and Abby Borden are still so pissed off all these years later that they can still be heard around the Borden house.
Years after the murder, the Borden house became a museum/bed and breakfast. It was made up to look almost exactly as it did during the murders. Guests can sleep in the guest room where Abby was killed and then wake to eat a lovely breakfast of bananas, coffee, and Johnny cakes, just like the couple did before they died.
We are so going to stay there. Girls trip.
I know.
Ghost sightings are common at the Borden B&B. MSNBC even listed the house among the top 10 most haunted houses in the United States. The most active ghost seems to be Abby. Guests have reported hearing the sound of a woman weeping in the bedroom where Abby's body was found. Others have heard the sound of footsteps, and some have said that as they lay on their beds, an older woman in Victorian-era dress comes to tuck them in for the night. Andrew is also still around, showing up to see what's happening at seances held at the B&B. There's also a female spirit seen carrying a sharp weapon. Is this Lizzie or the real murderer? Or is it just another woman who finally found something in the barn?
And just like other hotbeds of paranormal activity, many visitors have captured photos, videos, and audio recordings that feature unusual blobs of light, sounds resembling screaming, and shadows that shouldn't be there. The owner of the house has been touched and pushed by something unseen. In 2008, a couple staying there celebrating their anniversary left the house in horror after their door flew open by itself and a lamp moved on its own. The Bordens are also said to haunt the cemetery where the bodies are buried.
Let's talk now about the ghosts in the witch city, Salem, Massachusetts. We all know the story, but let's review. In 1692, two young girls wrongfully accused people in their town of witchcraft. This was a spark that started the wildfire that is now known as the Salem witch trials. Mass hysteria in the town led to hundreds of people being charged and 20 executions of innocent people.
Of all the gift shops and New Age bookstores, there is only one building that has a connection to the trials. It is known locally as the Witch House, Judge Jonathan Corwin's former home. Some who visit the historic site are overcome with feelings of anxiety, fear, and anger, all of the emotions that were experienced by those that Corwin sentenced to death. Some have seen an apparition of a woman hanging out of the bedroom window on the second floor.
Oh, weird. Others have witnessed a couple that vanishes into thin air while walking the grounds. Employees have reported strange noises after hours, including what sounds like the shuffling of feet on the floor and dragging heavy furniture from one room to another. Spirits don't only haunt the witch house in Salem, though. There's an area of town called Gallows Hill. This is the place believed to be where the hangings of the accused witches took place, though no precise records still exist.
So what's more, there is a basketball court and a playground where the gallows once stood. Can you imagine having your kids play there where people were hung? This could possibly explain the photos of apparitions and other strange phenomena that occur at the site. Electronics malfunction there, and it isn't uncommon for people to hear disembodied crying at night. Some people have reported an invisible presence brush up against them, and still others have had their hair pulled.
Salem is also home to several cemeteries, one of the most haunted being the Howard Street Cemetery. This cemetery sits across from where the old jail once stood. People have captured many anomalies on film, such as unexplainable mists, orbs, and lights. There have been many reports of physical contact with an invisible entity as well.
Now this brings us to the story of Giles Corey. A woman named Ann Putnam accused Corey, who was over 80 years old at the time, of appearing to her as a spirit and trying to entice her with his satanic ways. Corey didn't think much of the charges and even supported accusations against his wife until he realized that the charges were actually serious.
What a moron. Sheriff Corwin, the son of Judge Corwin, was making a lot of money off the prosecution of the so-called witches in Salem. Anyone who was found guilty of witchcraft had to give up their property to the city of Salem, and it was then redistributed. So, Giles Corey was in a bad spot. If he pleaded guilty, he would lose everything. On the other hand, no one who had not pleaded guilty was found to be innocent. Either way, his sons would not inherit the estate. It would go to the sheriff and other town leaders. Corey was not playing this game.
Sheriff Corwin attempted to press a plea out of Corey, literally. Corwin had the 80-year-old Corey lie down and placed weights on his chest. Every time he refused to confess, Corwin added more weight. This act preserved his son's inheritance, but cost him his life. Before he died, though, he spat at the sheriff and declared that he cursed both him and the town of Salem.
And Giles Corey meant business. Whenever someone saw Corey, it meant disaster was not far behind. The last time he was spotted was in 1914, just before a fire nearly destroyed the whole city of Salem. The curse doesn't only target the town itself. The very office that the sheriff held is said to be cursed. Every sheriff of Salem since Corwin has either died in office or retired due to heart problems.
Clearly, the eastern United States is a wealth of paranormal activity due to its age and violent past, but there are some rather haunted sites in the Midwest as well. In the 1920s, Al Capone ruled Chicago. Gambling, prostitution, and bootleg whiskey were all controlled by him and his gangsters. They weren't the only gang in town, though. A man named George Bugs Moran was hedging for Capone's empire.
In 1929, Moran and his gang had slowly been inserting themselves into the Chicago business in an effort to shove Capone and his men out. Rumors began to spread that Capone was going to take care of Moran. However, as days turned into weeks, Moran and his men relaxed a little. This, as we all know, was a grave mistake.
Yeah. On February 14th, 1929, 6 members of the Moran's gang were inside the SMC Cottage Company. Mechanic John May, who was not a member but was hired to work on one of their cars, was with them. The building was raided by Capone's men. They ordered everyone to line up facing the back wall. The men did what they were told because the raiders were dressed as police officers. After a hail of shotgun fire and more than 70 submachine gun rounds, the 7 men were dead. Dead. Dead.
Damn. Bugs Moran wasn't in the building that day. Al Capone was suspected but never charged with the slaughter. They did, however, charge John Scalise and Jack Machine Gun McGurn with the murders. Scalise was murdered before his trial began, and the charges against McGurn were eventually dropped. Capone did end up doing 1 year in the clink for a weapons charge. Many thought this was considered easy time. However, Capone's time would be anything but easy.
As the story goes, Capone was being haunted by the ghost of James Clark, a man who was killed during the Valentine's Day Massacre. Capone was often heard yelling in his jail cell, "Jimmy, leave me alone!" The ghost apparently followed Capone home after his release from jail. Capone's valet saw an unfamiliar man in Capone's apartment. When he told the man to identify himself, the guy slipped behind a curtain and disappeared. Some say that Clark haunted Capone until his death on January 25th, 1947.
The building where the massacre took place was eventually demolished in 1967. The wall where the men stood was dismantled brick by brick and sold to a businessman, who in turn sold these morbid items to customers and tourists. However, many of the bricks were returned soon after. The customers reported that after they purchased a brick, they fell victim to illness, financial ruin, divorce, and even death. The owners came to believe that the bricks were cursed.
It reminds me of James Dean's car.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Because the pieces of that are said to be cursed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Peace.
Crazy. So
Crazy.
we're going to stay in Illinois for a bit. Have you ever heard of the Watseka Wonder, Jen?
I have not heard of the Watseka Wonder.
Well, it was in the late 1870s when it is said that the spirit of Mary Roff inhabited the body of 13-year-old Lawrence Venom. This became known as the Watseka Wonder.
Mary Roff was just 18 years old when she died in 1865 in an insane asylum. She had suffered a lifelong illness which gave her seizures and caused her to hear voices in her head. She had an obsession with bloodletting and would apply leeches to her body, poke herself with pins, and cut herself with razors. Doctors thought that Mary was ill, but others, including her own family, believed that her problems were supernatural.
At the time Mary died, Lawrence Venom, can we just pause for a second and just admit that, and just, I don't know, pay notice to what a cool name that is?
Mm-hmm.
Lawrence Venom.
It is a cool name.
Right? Cool name.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's like she needs leotards and a cape because it's clearly a super villain or superhero name.
I completely agree with you. Yeah. So, okay, at the time Mary died, Lawrence Venom was just over a year old. She and her parents moved to Watseka a few years after Mary's death and knew nothing of the girl. In July 1877, 12 years after Mary's death, Lawrence began to show the same symptoms that Mary had. Uncontrollable seizures, her speech became garbled, and she often spoke in a strange language. She would fall into trances, assumed different personalities, and claimed to see spirits. Many of the townspeople thought that Lawrence should be committed just as Mary had been. The Venoms, however, were ardent spiritualists as a result of what was happening to their daughter, and they adamantly believed that unseen forces were at work here.
Lawrence's parents believed that their daughter was not insane, but that she was being possessed by spirits of the dead. With the permission of Lawrence's parents, Mary's father, Asa Roff, met with the young girl with Dr. E. Winchester Stevens, who also happened to be a spiritualist. During this visit, a spirit asked to take control of Lawrence's body to protect her from sinister forces. The spirit was said to be Mary Roff.
Mary explained that Lawrence was ill and needed to go to heaven to be cured. She said that she would stay and occupy Lawrence's body until May. And it did seem as though she did just that. Lawrence looked the same, but she didn't know her family or her life. She did have intimate knowledge of the Roff family, though, and treated them as such.
In February 1878, Lawrence/Mary asked to go live with the Roffs. Lawrence's parents reluctantly agreed. When they were traveling to the Roffs' house, they passed the house where Mary lived when she was alive. Lawrence asked why they weren't stopping. The Roffs explained that they had moved into a new home a few years ago. This was something that Lawrence/Mary would not have known. She spent several months living with the Roffs and identified people and things that Lawrence would not have known.
Mary did leave Lawrence's body on May 21st, 1878. When Lawrence awoke from her trance, she no longer had any of the numerous problems she'd had previously. She also did not recollect anything that happened in the prior months while Mary was in her body. Lawrence came out of the experience healthy and happy. She grew up to marry and have 13 children.
That is fascinating. It is believed, though, that Mary did not leave Lawrence entirely. Lawrence apparently kept in touch with the Roff family, with whom she had a closeness she couldn't explain. She would visit them once a year and allow Mary's spirit to take over her body, just like it did in the late 1870s. Ooh.
Yeah. Okay, so the previous ones, I don't think we needed a legit or bullshit, but this one might be kind of fun to legit or bullshit. What do you think? about Mary?
You know what? I don't know. I would like to research this further. Right now, I'm inclined to say legit based on what I'm presented here. Yeah, I say legit.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's legit, but I think it also might be a good one to do its own, to have our own episode on just this one. It's very interesting. I'd never heard of this before, ever.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. I agree with you. Very, very fascinating.
I do like a good possession story.
I know you do. I know you do.
I do.
Yeah, I say legit. These are all really good stories, and I think you and I have our work cut out for us as far as our bucket list. It just keeps growing.
It does.
We're going to have to take some trips.
I know. Because, yeah, we got to go visit some of these places. I mean,
excellent episode, Andy. These are really good hauntings, and I'll put kind of a list on the show notes of things we've covered in this episode, and the book obviously goes into these in kind of a superficial way. It kind of highlights them, but I would encourage everybody to read a little more deeply, as if you're interested in a particular subject, or if there's one you want us to cover more deeply, please shoot us an email or get in touch, and we'd be happy to look into that for you.
Yeah.
As always, we want to thank everybody for listening. You make every episode so fun and worthwhile.
Absolutely. And please reach out to us on Facebook, Instagram, or through email at jenandandy@ichabodshouse.com. And remember, we're available for streaming now on YouTube.
That's right. Until next time, remember, Ichabod loves you.
Carry a flashlight and always bring extra pants.